Okay, my sponge cake is crumb coated, and now we get to decorate. The first thing we need to do is we need to cover our cake with fondant. So I'm going to take my fondant and decide how much of this I need to use to cover my cake. In order to do this, I need to measure my cake. One of the coolest tricks that I have found to do this is to actually take a piece of masking tape and just kind of lay it out over your cake and figure out how big your cake is. So I measure out my cake, and I can just stick this to my table, and that tells me how big my cake is, right? That's the side, the top, and then the other side of my cake. So I'm going to take a piece of fondant about 1 inch thick, and I should be able to flip it about 3 times over this piece of tape and make sure that it's going to cover. So I'm just going to kind of work this into a circle, smash it out till it's about 1 inch thick, and then I'm going to set it at the edge of my tape. And so this is 1, I'm going to flip 2, flip 3, and I actually came over the edge of my tape just a little bit, and so I know for sure that this is going to cover my cake. So this is the right amount of fondant. You want to make sure that your table's really clean so that your fondant doesn't pick up any dirt or any crumbs from your table. So I'm going to slide my cake out of the way for a minute so that I can roll out my fondant. I'm going to use powdered sugar to dust my table. You can do cornstarch if you want. I just find that when you're making a cake, you tend to have powdered sugar out for other reasons, so it's already out on your counter. I want to make sure that my fondant really doesn't stick, and it's a little warm in a kitchen, especially after you've been baking a cake. So I'm just going to take a little bit of my powdered sugar, and I'm just going to rub a little bit on both sides of my fondant to make sure that it's not going to stick to my table. I'm going to do the same for my rolling pin. I have just a straight wooden rolling pin. It'll work just fine for fondant as long as it doesn't have any big indents or holes or cracks or anything in it. So it needs to be a pretty good wooden rolling pin. I'm just going to put some powdered sugar on it to make sure it doesn't stick, and I'm going to start to roll my fondant. I want to roll and keep this in a circle as I'm rolling. So every couple rolls, I actually give my fondant about a 90-degree turn to keep it in a circle. This also helps you to make sure it's not sticking to your table. So I give it just a couple rolls and then a nice spin. And I can see I've got a spot there that's wanting to stick a little bit, so I'm just going to make sure it's got enough powdered sugar under it. Give it a couple more rolls. Another spin. As this gets bigger, your fondant gets more fragile. You can actually put a big hole in your fondant with just your fingertip because it gets stretched out and fragile. So you want to kind of bring your fingers in and guide it around rather than to pull it from one edge once it gets to a big enough size. Okay, so I have my fondant rolled up on my rolling pin. I have made sure that I've got all the big bits of powdered sugar off. And now I'm just going to slide my cake back over so that it's right in front of me and ready to work with. I want to make sure that I roll this off really carefully. So I'm just going to start with it on the edge of my turntable, and I'm just gonna roll it straight down over the edges of my cake. Make sure that I work out a couple of those big wrinkles, and then I'm just gonna trim this up a little bit right to the edge of my turntable just to make sure that gravity doesn't pull my fondant all the way off of my cake. I'm gonna set that scrap aside, and I'm gonna work on smoothing my fondant. So I'm gonna start at the top of my cake. I'm just using the side of my hand. I'm just going to smooth down the side of my cake. As I do this, I'm going to create wrinkles in my fondant, so I just kind of have to pick those up and smooth them down as I go. I fold my wrinkle out a little bit and pull down with my hand just a little bit on my fondant. If I pull too much, I'm actually going to crack my fondant along the top of my cake and leave a hole. So I'm just going to keep spinning and smoothing as I go. Come up underneath with one hand and just smooth down the side with the other so that you're folding all of those wrinkles out. So I'm all the way down at my turntable now. So I'm just going to kind of come back around here, make sure everything's smoothed, and then I'm just going to cut my excess fondant off. So I'm going to use just a rolling cutter. You can also use a paring knife for this if you don't have a cutter. I'm going to start about 1/4 to 1/2 inch away from the edge of my cake, just so that I can reuse these fondant scraps. I don't have to worry about them having any frosting on them this far out from my cake. And that way I'm not wasting a lot of fondant. And then I can come in closer to this side here and cut my excess fondant off of my cake. Come around the back here, and I can just peel these pieces of fondant away. This fondant has frosting and stuff on it and is sticky and gross, so we're going to make sure we throw that away so that it doesn't get into all of our other fondant, and we can actually reuse what we have left. So I can just kind of run my hands over this, make sure all of my edges are smooth, and I have a fondant covered cake. Now we can decorate.